Loki is the dragon of destruction. Yes, I know the chapter refers to him as the god of war. And look, nothing against Kratos. God of War is definitely a cool title. I just kind of think Dragon of Destruction sounds a bit cooler. But regardless of what you call him, now that Loki has descended down onto the battlefield, he is ready to show us, and more importantly, Emu, exactly why you don't mess with the giants. As him and a giant fight Luffy essentially wage a two-man war against these invaders, decimating most of their forces and completely shifting this battle in their favor. But even with them being put on the back foot, Emu doesn't seem the least bit worried, because Loki revealing his devil fruit might have just given them exactly what they wanted. But first, we gotta talk about Summers, because dude, he just hit an all-time low in terms of failure. This chapter begins with Sanji pretty easily breaking away the vines around Robin, revealing a rather substantial and albeit obvious weakness they have. They're weak to extreme heat. Emphasis on the extreme part, because I don't think simple fire would necessarily do much if any damage to them, let alone break them. Because remember, these thorns, even without being coated in hockey, are said to be as tough as iron, which will get hot to the touch when put in something like fire, maybe even get a bit burnt, but it won't break. So had, let's say, Usopp tried using fire to burn away Robin's thorns, all he ended up doing is heating them up and potentially hurting her in the process. Iron has a melting point of 1,538 degrees Celsius or 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which regardless of which one you use, they both equate to really, really fucking hot, much hotter than regular fire. And it also just so happens to be about how hot Sanji's Diambe Jambe is, which is why it seems like he's so easily able to break the thorns with it, because his kicks are essentially melting them on impact. Also real quick, one thing that I want to point out is the way that Sanji acts in this chapter. Because despite just saving Robin and this being the perfect time for him to go into his usual comedy routine over the two girls, he stays focused, especially after feeling Loki's hockey in the distance. I'm bringing this up because once Sanji starts to lock in like this during an arc, it leads to him getting some really impressive moments. Something I was starting to get scared we might not see from him here, given how little he's actually shown up in this arc. I think the only Straw Hat that's shown up less than him so far is Frankie. But now I'd say it's a pretty good chance that he's going to get his moment. The only question is who's going to be on the receiving end. Also, real quick, I want to bring up Zoro because there is a funny moment between him and Luffy we get early on here. After Loki and Luffy drop off the kids and adults from the last chapter, Luffy notices Zoro and says, "Hey, if you're here, that means the village is a pretty safe place," implying that the kids and Enter Giants should be fine to stay here because Zoro will take care of whatever comes at them. Only for Zoro to answer back in a very unsure manner, "Sure, let's say that." I just found this funny because Luffy has all the confidence in the world that nothing will get past Zoro and that the kids are going to be safe as long as he's here to protect them, while Zoro is looking around at everything he's up against and is like, yeah, I don't know about that. Which I mean, technically, Luffy is right. Bar Emu himself showing up, nothing is getting past Zoro to put those kids in any real danger. Especially not with the other giants there to slow down the enemies for him, but I just got a small laugh at how uncertain Zoro was here. Anyway, now that Robin's free, the last thing keeping the bulk of the Straw Hats from participating in this fight has been completely removed, which means now everyone is ready to jump back in and get some sweet, sweet revenge against these Gods Knights. Well, everyone except Frankie, like I just mentioned. We really haven't seen him since chapter 1148, where we got a small panel of him fighting an off-screen opponent, likely one of the nightmares, as Ripley rushes past him to go and try to help save the kids. And before that, we saw him briefly in chapter 1144 with Lilith and Bonnie as they discovered that ancient factory, just before getting attacked by that lightning cloud nightmare, which Frankie was able to take down in chapter 1146. But besides these three brief check-ins, Frankie, Lilith, and Bonnie have essentially been MIA this entire arc. We have no idea where they currently are or what they're doing. I mean, we can assume they're still helping the giants fight off against these nightmares, and with Loki taking out a large bulk of them in this chapter, that may free them up to rejoin the rest of the crew. But it's just as likely that they went back to the ancient factory that they found and are rummaging through that, looking for clues about the world's history. Or they could be off setting up that device that Lilith needed to create in order to bring Vegapunk back to life. Until Oda brings them back into the story, we really won't know. I'm also just now realizing that Kuma is also currently MIA, not that he could help much in this fight anyway, but more than likely he's off with the three of them doing whatever they're doing. But putting them to the side for now, again, Robin being free is now a huge win for the Straw Hats, and one of three major L's Summers takes in this chapter. The second being with the kids, who he thought he just watched fall to their deaths, dragging their parents and loved ones down with them into the underworld, in the exact kind of loving sacrifice that makes him do his best Hisoka impression. only to find out that not only did they not die, but they came back with two literal gods. And as a quick side note, a Twitter post actually reminded me that this chapter actually has a pretty nice callback to the beginning of this arc. If I can find the post again, because I wasn't at my computer when I saw it, I'll put it up here. So basically, the post reminded me that when Ripley and Luffy first met, she mentioned really wanted to see him in his all-white form because she wanted to see the Sun God with her own eyes. And now, in this chapter, she actually gets to see him in Gear 5 right before seemingly passing out due to all the damage she's taken. It wasn't as built up or even as impactful as Bonnie's first time seeing Nikka back on Egghead. That had a lot more behind it and was built up throughout the entire arc in order to hit that emotional beat. But after the last chapter and her willingly sacrificing her own life out of love for her son without even hesitating to do so, this felt like a nice way for Oda to give her the only thing she asked for this entire arc. And to make it even better, it was a nice big middle finger right in the face of Summers, who was so enraged by being denied the, let's call it, excitement of watching all of them meet their tragic ends, that he actively ignores the two literal gods right in front of him. He even, quite stupidly I might add, admits out loud that he doesn't care about Imu's plan to take the kids anymore and use them as hostages to bring Elbaph under their control. The only thing on his mind is that he didn't get what he wanted. And this might be the peak example of how entitled the world nobles are, that even the threat of crossing the literal devil that they worship doesn't beat out his needs to get what he desires. And despite the fact that it might end with Imu pulling a Saturn 2.0 on him, Summers still tries to get his revenge for this slight by ending them all right here and now. But this does lead to him getting a second chance at that euphoric high he's been chasing when the kids decide to risk their own lives in order to protect their parents and loved ones, only for Zoro to step in and deflect the torrents he shot at them, denying him once again. That's L number 2. And then the third one follows almost immediately after when his face meets Luffy's hockey-infused fist as Luffy throws out his brand new move, Booming Dawn Thor Rifle, which involves him grabbing some lightning, twisting his arm around, and fusing Conqueror's Haki into it, or at least I assume he does, given what it does to Summers, and then bringing it down on his victim like thunder. And this hit is so devastating that the impact actually breaks Summers apart, seemingly shattering him to pieces, which ends up finally freeing the kids from their thorns. Then Loki finishes things by stomping him into the ground, seemingly taking him out for good. And look, I was really pulling for Sanji to be the one to put Summers in his place like this. It just seemed fitting given that he is Gabon's counterpart on the Straw Hats, and Gabon was the one who embarrassed the God Knight like this earlier in the arc. Honestly, I'd probably say even more so than Luffy did right here. Plus, I've been very openly calling for this to be Sanji's matchup, so that it can also serve as the battle that finally awakens his Conqueror's Haki, since it seems like Oda has been hinting at his being tied much more to love than any other emotion. And given that Summers takes a sick pleasure in twisting, manipulating, and outright abusing the love others feel for one another for his own personal amusement, well, no better person for Sanji to throw his first Conqueror's kick in the face at. But you know what? This panel right here of Summers being torn apart on impact is very satisfying, so I'm surprisingly okay with this being how he gets taken down. Plus, I mean, the arc is still seemingly far from over, so there is a solid chance that the God's Knight will end up regenerating, only to get done just as dirty once Sanji runs into him. Especially once he finds out that Summers was the one that hurt Robin, I don't think there's any force on this earth that will be able to save him from Sanji's wrath at that point. But now with the kids out of danger, there is nothing holding the Giants back any longer from going all out against Imu and their forces. I know they said they'd fight back with everything they had a couple chapters ago after Jarl's big speech, but I feel like they were still definitely holding back some due to the kids still being held hostage. But now that they're not, I expect us to see the adult Giants be much more involved in this fight going forward. And my best guess is that we're going to see them mostly focusing on fighting Dory, Broggy, and the rest of the demonized giants alongside the Nightmares. Well, the Nightmares that somehow managed to survive Loki in this chapter, while the heavy hitters like the Monster Trio and Loki focus on the big fish. Or at least, that's what I hope. I don't know though. As the chapters go by, I'm starting to wonder more and more if Zoro is going to have any real role in all this, fighting one of the God's Knights, or if he's going to be solely handling the co-captains of the giant warrior pirates. I mean, not that there's anything against him fighting them, especially if it's solo. I just kind of feel like he'd have a much better showing of how much he's grown between Egghead and now if he's fighting one of the God's Knights. Plus, narratively speaking, I have been very open about the fact that I want the new giant warrior pirates to be the ones to take on the old ones. But hey, that's a topic for a future chapter because we just have to sit back and wait to see how things play out. But for now, we have yet another flashback to go over. This one's pretty short and actually a continuation of one we already saw a couple of chapters ago, but sheds some new light on a lot of things. Least of all, the fact that Loki's dragon isn't purple is going to be just as solid black that we see in this chapter. Anyway, first off, we find out that Loki's fruit is the dragon fruit, mythical type, model Nidhager, which I am 100% sure I just mispronounced. And it's a fruit that regardless of who eats it, will turn the user into the largest dragon in the world. Though the way Jarl describes it was a bit confusing at first, because he says that the maximum size of the user's zoan form is dependent on who ate it. So if a human ate it, their maximum size would be smaller than that if a giant ate it, and a normal giant wouldn't reach the same size that Loki has because Loki has ancient giant blood in him. Which at first to me meant that, well, only a giant with ancient giant blood could actually be considered the largest dragon in the world when eating the fruit. But then I realized that even if a normal human eats it, they'll still grow to be larger than the largest dragon that currently exists. So say the largest natural dragon in the world is 200 feet tall, a human that eats the fruit will grow to be like 201 feet, making them the largest. And it's just that that's not the fruit's full potential, but there's a limit to how much of that potential anyone besides an ancient giant can actually use. That's why Zebek was so determined to have Harold eat the fruit and join his crew, because as the largest, most powerful ancient giant alive, he thought only Harold could bring out the fruit's full power. Little did he know that the kid who was constantly begging to join instead would actually be the one to end up doing it. Speaking of, this chapter kind of hinted more towards my theory about why no one had eaten the fruit until Ragnar led Loki, because the squirrel was waiting for someone specific to take his master's powers. And look, I may be completely wrong about this, but until we get to see the eyes of the previous user, I'm sticking with my theory that it wasn't Loki overpowering Ragnar that made it choose him. It was Loki having the same eyes as his old master. Eyes that, as far as we are aware, no other ancient giant has been born with. And eyes that signify he is meant to wield the power of the Dragon of Destruction. Yes, I'm sticking with that name. I'm telling you, it's going to grow on you. But as it stands, it seems like it was Loki's fate to become the next Nidhager, just like it was seemingly his fate to meet Luffy, the new iteration of Sun God Nikka. The two have a past connection, one that will greatly affect the fate of the current world, and might even be the reason for the ending of one of the previous ones. Because the major word drop we get in this flashback is that the previous Nidhager faced off against the Sun God in an epic clash, one where we don't know who walked away the victor. But if those two had power even close to what we've seen from Luffy and Loki, then a clash between those two would have been destructive, enough to at least level a whole island. And based on what we've seen from the mural earlier in this arc, Nidhager might have been the one to destroy the second world, and that could have been during this clash. But here's the thing, I don't actually think we're reading this right, because that dark figure that we see in the second world, that's definitely meant to be Nidhager. I don't think there's any doubt about that, but I do think that instead of being what destroyed the world, what we see here is the ebony dragon fighting to save it. Saving it from the giant serpent we see in the first world, that is likely meant to be the sea gods mentioned in the text. I'm still working on this theory about how things played out back then and what role these three gods played in it, the sun god, the god of war, and the sea god, but I really do think that this dragon was working to protect the world alongside Nikka, and that's why Emo's after it, because it's another weapon ally on the sun god's side that they want to take for themselves in order to ensure that the next war ends in their favor. And now that they know that Nidhager is here, their objective has completely changed. I mean, sure, they still likely want the giants as their slave army. That is an almost unstoppable force that would easily give them an almost certain victory in any battle. But now their main focus is taking this dragon. Because if I'm right about the dragon we see on the mural being a protector of the second world instead of the one that destroyed it, then it was as big of a threat to Emu as the sun god was. Meaning that together, Luffy and Loki pose an enormous threat. But if Emu could take control of the giant, then that's one less insect they have to squash. Which ironically is something they could have done much earlier in this arc. Back when Gunko and Shamrock first met Loki and were trying to, let's call it, persuade him to join them, had Emu taken control of Gunko back then, they could have easily Dami reverse-eyed the giant, and boom, Nidhager would have been theirs. And I guess this also confirms just how far in his war against the World Gov Loki actually got before he was captured, because Emu just now realizing that he has a fruit means that Emu never saw Loki take this form. Now that could mean that Loki strictly stuck to partial transformations like turning its hands into claws, or only used his hybrid form when fighting during his time at sea, but this means it's not likely that he ever made it even close to the Holy Land, or Emu would have at least heard about his powers and would have been able to connect the dots. Emu's not the smartest character we've seen, but I think they're smart enough to figure out that the giant with dragon powers might have eaten the fruit they knew was on Elbaph. Also, I don't think Emu knew that Loki even existed, because had they known about Harrow's son and how strong he was, I feel like they would have made it a priority to take control of him. I mean, like making any attempt to get him on their side over the past couple years when he was chained up, let alone doing it when Gunko was face to face with the giant. Either way, Emu walking in on both Luffy and Loki at the end of this chapter tells me that they are their next target, giving us the clash between gods we've been expecting since the moment Emu showed up on the island. But there is a slight worry we should have in the back of our minds, because that mention of the previous users of both god fruits battling it out, plus the fact that this was the arc that introduced us to not only the idea of Dami Reverse Eye, but that anyone can fall prey to it, does imply that the slight possibility exists that Emu will manage to turn the two gods against one another. And look, I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I'd much rather see these two tag team against Emu during this arc, but if it does end up happening, I have all the confidence in the world that Luffy will find out how to break this curse.